there's a lot more addiction. There's a lot more suicide. There's a lot more extreme reaction and challenge that people are experiencing in the collective. What's your advice to anyone who feels that they are, if you will, under the influence of this difficult time? How do we make it through a moment such as this collectively?
We're constantly being taught by the media that we are not good enough and that everything is separate from us, especially in the United States. Everyone for themselves. It's so individualized. And everyone is here to get special and show up and stand out. What I see in myself and in my own practice is if I can continuously allow myself to feel connected to the suffering and the pain of the world and to not lose myself in it, but to support myself with my practices, I'm not separate from any of that. It keeps me practicing, keeps me wanting to fortify myself. It keeps me wanting to connect to other people and wanting to serve locally. It gives me a purpose. Continuously remember that you're part of something bigger. You are never, ever alone here. And all of us understand how your pain has arisen because we all have our own story.
Welcome. I am your host, Tommy Rosen, and today I have the joy and the honor of connecting with my dear friend, Elena Brower. Mother, mentor, poet, artist, volunteer, best-selling author, and host of the Practice You podcast. Elena Brower has taught yoga and meditation for the past 25 years. Her books, Art of Attention, Practice You, Being You, and Softening Time walk us through stages of practice, life, and listening. Elena's Perceptive Parenting audio course is a key resource for parents. Her yoga practices and meditations are featured on Glow. Elena works to elevate bright futures for girls, women, and children through her support for Girls on Fire leaders, On the Inside, and Free Food Kitchen. Most recently, Elena received the Buddhist precepts from Roshi Joan Halifax in 2023 and is now a candidate for chaplaincy. Elena, welcome to the Recovery 2.0 Life Beyond Addiction Conference. I'm so grateful to talk with you.
Thank you, Tommy, my brother. So happy to be here. Thank you.
You know, I want to begin by telling you why we're here from my perspective. We're here in part because I have a drive, I'm compelled, I'm inspired to share the goodness and the power and the treasures and the things that I have found in my unfolding recovery journey. My journey of discovery would be a broader way of putting that. And one of the great treasures that I found along the way is you. And I want to share you and your teachings, your presence and your love, your kindness, your compassion, and your wisdom with the people here today. From my perspective, that's why we're here.
Thank you so much.
You may have your reasons, but that's a part of what's here. So we're calling this Life Beyond Addiction because we've identified the challenge of being a person on a path of discovery, on a path of spirit, on a path of recovery. We've identified the incredible challenge is not just the moment where you decide to change a behavior or stop a self-harming behavior, but the challenge is one day at a time for the rest of our life. Because we haven't done such a great job yet in society, helping people to really understand how to live well one day at a time. That's the focus of this conference. And I've gone out into the world and asked certain people like yourself, would you please share a bit about that one day at a time thing and that process of discovery that you've been through. So with that in mind, could you share a bit about your recovery and your discovery, as we could call it? You know, as I look at your bio, and I know you personally, and I've seen you evolve over the years in very profound ways. It seems like if I had to encapsulate your story in a word, it would be evolution. That you really, really are this evolutionary being, and that's been a part of the developing of your life beyond addiction, and your life of power, and your life of joy, and your life of love. Can you speak to that evolutionary process a little bit?
Yes, sir. My gosh, I have to find a place to begin. I think I'll begin in your old house over there in Venice. Let's start there. I was teaching on Glow. I was visiting with the two of you. We were having a meal. There might have been also a party at some point during that time. There were so many moments where I felt so seen by you and a few other folks, including DJ Pierce, including several other friends who supported my sobriety back, we're going now 10 years. And what I think is most interesting is that you were supportive of me before I got sober. And that changed something in me. Yeah, there were a few eyeballs and hearts on me that were supportive way in advance of my choice to finally like clear my decks, clear my head, clear my heart. But I would say in the last 10 years since getting sober, the evolution really began, and choosing to live a life of non-separation is the best way that I can say it. I'm no longer feeling separate from the rest of the world. I no longer feel like I have to hide from the world. I no longer feel like I have any secrets that I have to keep. And that lends itself, that sort of freedom and openness and sort of voluntary willingness to be in connection with the world, has lent itself to this continual changing of my inner state. And I think the choice that I've made over the last 4 or 5 years to turn toward Zen as a practice first. I don't think I considered myself a Buddhist until the other day when I found myself in the supermarket wearing a black dress and black high tops and my hair super short. And some older lady looks at me really sweetly and she goes, "Are you a Buddhist?" And I was like, I sort of looked around and nobody else was there except for the checkout person who I know for a long time now. And I looked at him and I looked at her and I was like, I guess.
It could be.
The truth is, I've taken the precepts. I've chosen to live by vow. And it's such a freeing choice. And that choice also comes from this choice to be sober and the tendency to want to sort of be apart from everything else and different and special and successful. All these various things that I have always thought were important have now ceased to amaze me. And I am in a place where freedom, real freedom, feels like a sense of fearlessness and connectivity with the harder things in my life and in the world around me, particularly in my community. And that feels really good. You know, I sleep very deeply at night unless James wakes me up snoring. Yeah.
Which you handle gracefully.
I try. I just sort of nudge him a little bit. I go like this, and every now and again I'll go, ah, and he'll like get up and leave and go to the office and sleep on the bed in there. Every now and again during allergy season. But the point I think to close that answer is a choice to get sober led in no uncertain terms to this practice of finding myself getting very still, trying to be of service, and a few small ways in my community, and sleeping deeply.
Beautiful. There's this interesting phenomena, I think, that happens with yoga teachers in our modern age. I'm speaking in the West, Western approach to yoga, because I've known you for a long time now, and I remember going to your yoga class in New York City at your studio
Those
back
were
in the
fun.
day, down on Broadway over there. And certainly for many years, by that point, by the time I had come to meet you, many, many people came to your class, many thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands, who really looked up to you. And I think that there was so much beauty there and power there and so much capability there. And you certainly had a very powerful grasp of yoga and how to give someone a felt experience of yoga. You had developed that capacity. And yet you so humbly say that it's really only 5 years ago when you took these precepts that this other awakening took place. And so it's important that we explore a little bit, I think, for people, what's happening for the individual. You can obviously speak from your own experience. What's happening for the individual who may not be there yet, but who is a conscious being and who is on a path of discovery, and maybe they haven't been able to put down the self-harming behavior, or maybe they're still caught up in the negativity and the judgment. Maybe they're dealing with a physical or emotional struggle that just won't quit. And yet, you know, it's because you said to me, you saw me, Tommy, even before I got sober. Well, it's not as if you didn't exist before you got sober for me. I saw beauty and I saw potential and I saw everything that you are and everything that you were then. And so where is the individual in this path before they feel themselves or they have had their own awakening?
You know, it's all still there. You just said it really nicely, where you saw the potential and you saw what was possible, and you accepted me as I was, no matter what. And I think that is probably the best medicine for any human who is struggling right now with any sort of behavior that you know is not serving you, and yet you cannot seem to stop. And I would just argue that inside of all of that behavior, that seeming temptation to continue this thing that just doesn't work, that you know is harmful, that hurts you, actually is painful. Inside of all of that is this timeless, wise elder. Doesn't matter how old you are, you're in there. And you're holding all of these possibilities in two hands like this, way inside of your being. And if you could just tap in, it's getting still enough to really listen to what is happening at the deepest level inside of my being, which is a comforting, wise, elder human helping all the time to remind me of who I am. That's all I find when I sit down. Yes, I have to go through, like when I sit for meditation, I have to go through like 4 or 5 lists every day, you know, running down the list of what has to happen and where the kid is and where's the man and what needs to be finished, what bill needs to be paid. After that, oh, it's the voice of my mother, it's the voice of myself as I'm older, it's the voice of my grandmother, it's silence, dead quiet in there. And all of that is leading me to know that I have something to give. I have no need for all of those painful behaviors anymore. And I really can be the woman that I've set out to be those 10 years ago, and sort of veered, you know, kind of veering off every now and again, but mostly on the track.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So in terms of your evolution and the very concept of life beyond addiction, I think a lot of people don't necessarily feel that that's actually a possibility.
Mm.
That's to say that I feel like we've been trained to doubt the possibility of freedom. So much so that when somebody speaks about it, or they speak about connecting with their true self and experiencing a release or a moment where literally you weren't chasing anything, thoughts stopped and you became fully present. And there was a sense of such warmth and such love and such acceptance that if we're honest with ourselves, we'd like to get back there again and experience that exact feeling. And in fact, that was the thing we were always looking for. But I think as a lifestyle, people don't think that that's possible. Life beyond addiction. What does that mean to you? What does it actually mean to you to live in a frequency or a space beyond addiction? Can you speak to that a bit in your experience?
I can. And because I've always found that stories are the best way to learn, especially in this space, I'm going to tell a little story. It's Christmas time last year. I have to sort of listen for the kid in case he comes in. It's Christmas time last year, and we find out that one of my son's
The
best
volume on
friends.
your voice just went down. I'm sorry.
Okay, hold on. There we go. How's that?
Much better.
So it's Christmas time last year, and we find out that one of my son's dearest friends has done some terrible things under the influence of alcohol and drugs. And somehow we all decide that we're going to do an intervention. We love him so much. We have him. We have one of the sort of victims of his behavior, two other friends, my kid, myself, James. And we sit around my dining room table. All of it comes out. The kid owns everything. It's very painful, very rich, painful conversation.
Hmm.
The victim forgives and sort of elaborates on the experience that was had by the hand of his behavior. It was so deep, and I still like sort of catches my breath when I think about it. The very next day, I cut up his fake ID and took him to AA. Very next morning, Christmas morning, we're 6:45 at an AA meeting. It was stunning, and we went every day for a few weeks. He struggled so hard to feel like he belonged anywhere. He sat through those meetings and he listened to all of the older folks, many of whom were older by far than we are, you and I, in their 60s, 70s, into their 80s. And he patiently listened. And finally, after a number of days, he realized that he actually totally belongs in this community and that the freedom of just owning your part in the drama and owning what arose naturally from the struggle of your childhood and full acceptance of all of that, even though it was so ugly and so painful for yourself and for somebody else, that surrounding yourself in a community, whether it's AA or something else, it's NA, whatever it is, was critical for this guy. And he is now 3 months sober. It's so awesome. But my son still won't accept him. And so I and James privately support him via text. Every now and again we can see him, but it's very challenging to sort of sneak around. It's just not my way anymore. I don't want to have to sneak around. I want to respect the kid, my kid, and I also want to be a support system. I'm in chaplaincy. Like, I am not turning away from this hard matter.
Hmm.
And what I would say to you listening, if you're listening or watching this right now, and you're really in a tough spot right now, and you just can't seem to get your hand out of the cookie jar, as it were, I know this feeling. And I saw myself do it so many days in a row, so many months, so many years in a row, and finally just got so sick of lying to myself. I saw this kid go through this at 18 years old to walk into an AA meeting and just barely eke out his first week.
Mm.
And now to have 3 months. I'm here to tell you that where your fear is the same place as where your courage is. And these two things must forever coincide in your body. They're never not going to be together. So deal with that and know that your choice to actually support yourself and to not put your hand in the cookie jar, to save your liver, your brain, your cells from that choice, is to sit with both fear and courage together and live your life in a really good way. And to sit in that circle and watch all these older folks, and there are a few younger kids as well, one in their 30s, one in their 40s, and my friend, my son's friend. It was one of the most uplifting times of my life to be in there for several weeks in a row every day, just going
Mm.
to the meeting, going to the meeting. I can't say enough about that.
Thank you. That's a powerful story. It's one of those stories, there's a lot to unpack there. The first thing that occurs to me is the lesson that you're sharing, which on one hand is a lesson of the power of community,
Mhm.
the power of choice to be in a community of people who are working to be better, working to be more aware, more conscious, the power of forgiveness, the possibility of forgiveness and
Totally.
self-forgiveness in particular. The idea that one could be in shame and remorse, but that doesn't have to be a life sentence, is an incredibly powerful concept. And I'm somebody that I champion the idea that people need different things at different stages of their recovery. But the teachings, there are also some things that people always need at every stage in their recovery. And this was one of those teachings where that's a teaching that is as good on day one as it is as good as on day 10,000. And the humility that this person had to develop and is developing in their 3 months, incredible.
Incredible. He wrote to me the other day. There are several friends who won't FW, won't fuck with him, won't talk to him because of what happened.
Mm.
And a few will. And he said, I know that my son, he said, I know he's going to come back someday to me.
Mm.
And will you do me a favor and give him a hug and don't tell him it's from me?
Mm. Mm.
Kills me.
Mm.
Like I just want to make it right. And I also, like, as a sort of a parenthetical teaching here, I also have to be in full acceptance of the fact that I can't fix this.
Mm.
As the mom, I just can't.
Mm-hmm.
I have to let it be, I have to really be in the marrow of my son's choice and in the marrow of his friend's choice to do
Mm-hmm.
the right thing and walk the right straight path forward,
Yes.
and hope for the best. I bought him a gift for his year, a lamp that he really likes in my house. I bought it for him already, so I'm waiting 9 more months.
Cool. I like the hopefulness of that.
Me too.
Yeah, it's these themes of forgiveness. Um,
Yeah.
we have the guilt shame mechanism. The guilt is valuable. It's
Agreed.
it's it's not a waste of time, especially if you can use that as the lesson plan. Your guilt will show you somewhere you missed the mark. Shame is sort of um, typically I see it as a fantasy. It's not a good story. If guilt is I did something wrong, which is valuable to know. Shame is I am something wrong, and that's just simply not accurate at anyone's core. So we're working to learn and to grow, and we offend people along the way at times, sometimes very, very badly. I just want to say that we live in a time right now, and it's a time of cancellation. When people offend us deeply, we've been shown the example in the last 20 years, but particularly in the last 5 or 10. We have so many examples of people that have, missed the mark, but we cancel them completely. From yoga teachers and spiritual leaders who fell from grace. We all know in our personal lives many examples, and politicians or athletes or public figures and people that are visible to us. When they fall from grace, we really, as a society, we tend to tear them to pieces, kill them in their character. And so this is part of the influence that we're all under right now. And I can say that when it comes to people who could be canceled from this world because of missing the mark, I'm at the top of that group of people from back in my behavior in my addictive days. I mean, I say it like this: I have lied, I have cheated, I have stolen, but I'm not a liar, and I'm not a cheat, and I'm not a thief. And that's a really important thing to understand. And the only reason I can say that is because of recovery. It's because of healing the things that took place in a previous level of consciousness where those behaviors became very possible, and not just possible, but normal. But I have compassion for myself, understanding who I was at that time and how I thought at that time and how desperate I was at that time. The same way when somebody else misses the mark, I have to use that lesson to apply the same compassion and forgiveness ultimately, or at least leave room for forgiveness. But in your son's defense, I will say this. There is that beautiful saying, to err is human, to forgive divine. And I think it's actually a more profound teaching than we sometimes give it its due. Because forgiveness is not something we can force. But our effort to understand plants the seeds for forgiveness. And so that effort to understand is a very Buddhist concept.
James feels the same way. And actually, the friend has indicated in no uncertain terms that he understands where my son is coming from and accepts fully that this could take a lot of time. Because my son was lied to multiple times to his face, So, to your point, I understand. And I also wanted to flag the shame versus guilt one more time for anyone listening or watching. Shame is a waste of our time. Full stop. Guilt, however, as you said, can be a curriculum. And I really appreciated that distinction.
Thank you. So you mentioned the power of community a moment ago, the power of being amongst a group of people who are making an effort in a certain direction.
Yes.
It's making me think of the Buddhist teaching of the 3 jewels: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Buddha, the teacher, an enlightened guide or teachings; the Dharma, the path or the way; and Sangha, the sacred community, the community dedicated to truth. So I was wondering if you could speak in terms of that teaching as a reflection of living a life beyond addiction.
Yeah. I think in most situations, if you've ever been addicted to anything, there are going to be these little sort of seemingly moorings that you want to grab onto, like, oh, she likes me, or oh, I'm seen here, oh, I'm accepted here. We have to remember that there are bigger concepts that we can sort of um, gather within ourselves and find in pretty much any situation. And those three treasures are the ways that I take refuge when I am having a really hard time.
Hmm.
The trick is, and the practice is, to remember to take refuge in those three treasures and to not disparage them. And I find myself very often, lighting an incense in the morning, sitting down for practice, getting up from practice, everything, even talking to the kids sometimes. He's leaving for college, by the way, in August. Like, what is that? Even what is that? You were there when I was praying. Even when I'm having such a hard time within myself in a certain situation or an interaction, I turn and take refuge in those three treasures, and I remember where I'm standing. Brings me back to the present moment. Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. It covers every single obstacle, seeming obstacle, and gives me a place to sort of hook my line, to put the rope and anchor the ship.
Can you speak to the particular teachers that have helped you along the way? Because at each sort of juncture in your evolution, I maybe in everybody's evolution, there's somebody or some teaching, some effort, some learning that takes place, either because there were words in the written form or words in spoken form. Can you speak about how you relate to your teachers, or even the concept of, do you think teachers are important in this life?
That's a very big question. And yes, I do. And at every stage, even when I've had teachers who have fallen from grace and who have made really shitty choices, there was always some really good understanding gained and some way to move forward from it. Some people I'm still in touch with, some people I'm not. But at the bookends of my experience here, now I'm almost 54, I've got Professor Douglas Brooks, who is the person who introduced me to philosophy. We're going back 20 years, where I would sit, take such copious notes, every word, finding the maps of consciousness, figuring out the Upanishads and the Gita and where that all stood for me. Who am I in this conversation? How am I Krishna? How am I Arjuna? How am I all these characters and all the different Upanishads? How am I sitting close to my teachers, And he's still very much in my life. I'm now taking his, he has a Substack called Rajanika, and I'm taking his course on the history of Buddhism, which has been great. And it turns out my little trajectory, my little speck of dust life started where the thing started, in India. And now I've traveled across the East toward Japan, and I'm fully obsessed with Japan. And through those years, I've had several teachers, all of whom are incredibly talented, gifted orators, speakers, teachers, committed to the practice, and somehow, in some way, have just fallen off. I have nothing against these humans. They're just humans. But I have choices. And the choice that I'm making at this stage and for the rest of my life is Zen. And my teacher, I have a few, but my teachers mostly are women at this point. Main teacher being Roshi Joan Halifax, the founder of Upaya Zen Center over 30 years ago. And she's 80, she'll be 82 this year, And in just a handful of days, I'll be heading to Japan to do what she claims to be her final pilgrimage to Japan.
Mm.
Don't know if that's true or not, but I'll be there with a small group. And sitting at the foot of a woman who's older than me is nothing short of precisely what I've always needed. And I just didn't know that at the time. And that's nothing against male teachers, but to be at her feet
Mm.
and at the feet of the women teachers who are near her, particularly a woman by the name of Nanette Overly, who is also known as Monchin. Both have copious Dharma talks on the Upaya Zen Center podcast, and those are free. You can donate if you like. And both are extraordinary.
Mm.
And these are women who have lived their whole lives and have great deal of wisdom to share.
Mm.
And I find a great deal of freedom and comfort with them that I hadn't found before. I never knew what I was missing, actually, in not studying with women.
Mm.
And I do feel that having a lineage is critical. There are lots of women out there, some yoga teachers with whom I've studied, who don't actually have a lineage. They've sort of picked and chosen from several different traditions, as I did for many years myself. No shame in that. But there's not like behind Roshi is thousands of years of practice coming from India to China, Korea,
Mm.
probably, and then from China to Japan, and from Japan to us. And I feel that lineage as I'm speaking. I feel a quality of patience. I don't need to prove myself anymore. I don't need to be the best. As I said earlier, I don't need to be special. I'm part of something much bigger
Mm.
than I will ever be. And to uphold that and to uphold the precepts and the treasures and all of the presence that has been offered over these many thousands of years through a practice, that's my main direction right now.
Mm. A teacher, I'm guessing. So these are revelations, and they come into us at a
Mm,
moment when we're ready to hear them.
mm,
And in my experience, I have found, well, with a few exceptions, just because there were a few moments in my life where it was just me and God, and there was no other human being. And there was a level of humility, or perhaps humiliation would be a better word, at times. And so there was a pure communication there without a human passing along a concept. But so that's as much a teaching as any other teaching. But the human being, the teacher who's further along the path than I or you or any of
mm.
us, helps to make these revelations, helps to unpack, helps you. In what way have you seen that possibility come for you that may not have come had you not been able to be at the foot of these wise elder women that you now find yourself, I think you would say, blessed to be in their presence. And in the West, we don't like to talk like this so much about other human beings, because I think people are like, oh, you're about to be taken advantage of if you're going to speak like that. you know,
Yeah.
that's I understand that, of course. There are charlatans in the world. There are false prophets, of course. But there's also a teaching, a truth, a love,
Yeah.
a presence, a wisdom. How has that student teacher relationship been for you in your life beyond addiction, or your effort each day to live a life beyond addiction?
Mm. Well, first of all, I want to just track what you said about, being at your lowest and hearing the voice of spirit or source or God or whatever that is. That's totally valid. And yes, that's a teaching, and it doesn't require a teacher.
Hmm.
But I will say rather, that what I find in the teachers that I've chosen to take me home is that they're really just pointing at things they're not really saying you have to do it this way or else, even though sometimes they do say things like that. And it's just like, girl, get it together
Mm,
kind of vibe, which I find very helpful and necessary for me. Um, I've had so many misperceptions and misconceptions over time and so many mistakes that I made before I got sober. I can't even begin, even after. It's just continuous. But the way that they point to things like, hey, think about this book or that list, or maybe look at that teacher and see what is happening there, or that teacher's teacher. Um, that sort of gentle nudging, the finger pointing at the moon, as they say, uh, that's everything. We don't need to be spoon fed. We need a teacher who's actually got subtlety and sensitivity enough to say, look in that direction and come back to me in 6 months with what you found.
mm,
That's all anyone ever needed, actually. And that is an ancient way of working. There's none of this like, here, module 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, follow this. We'll talk in 2 days. It's like, no, actually, take some time, read some books, sit and practice deeply, and then we can talk. And for my personal hasty mind, this has been a real adjustment that I've appreciated, and it's been very uncomfortable.
mm. Yes.
Very uncomfortable.
On that note, do you feel, hopefully not,
Mm.
but do you feel that this is a teaching that is not accessible by a young person? Because I think that as a society, we also have attributed, well, these are mature concepts and you won't be able to access them. We're in our 50s. And so when you get to be in your 50s, you too can access this. But I really, in my heart of hearts, feel that these lessons are accessible at any age, literally any age. And I'd like you to speak to that if you could, because we're speaking a little bit about what it is to become an elder, which
Yeah.
is beautiful and important and does have something to do with age and time here. But these lessons are, I think, universal. And I'd like to know, especially because you're a mother and you see a lot of younger people around your son, what do you think about the accessibility of these kinds of revelations and these kinds of teachings for someone, say, in their 20s?
I'll say a few things. Age is a blessing, there's no question. But the whole point of these teachings is reaching in one direction, which is toward the service of something that's bigger than you. So it doesn't matter if you're 17 or you're 87, there's a level of harmony that we're creating at every single age through whatever teachings we're getting that hopefully are leading us toward offering ourselves as a bodhisattva, practicing bodhicitta, and helping. I have experience now in hospice, a couple of different settings, and in teaching incarcerated men who are experiencing incarceration currently, let's say. That's why I'm here, it turns out. I'm not here to learn more and be better and be all the things. I'm here to serve people.
Mm,
And it doesn't matter how old you are, you loosening your opinions and holding your beliefs a little more lightly, that's always going to be a good idea. And that's all we're really learning when the teacher is pointing at a book or a teacher or some teaching. There's this idea to look at this possibility and let some other formation go and let some other formation arise. Just like get a little more spacious, get a little more free, get a little
mm,
more courageous to let go of what you thought was true and bring something else in that might also be true.
And you can do that at any age.
That's always valid. Like, I don't
Mm,
care how old you are. practice that. You will never be mad at me
Mm,
for practicing loosening your beliefs.
mm. Amazing. Thank you, Elena. We're coming to the end of our time today, but I want to cover one more topic with you before we get there, which is this. You brought up the word earlier, subtlety. You spoke of subtlety, and there is this move that I've noticed in life beyond addiction. One aspect of a life beyond addiction has to do with the exploration of the moving from a grosser energy
Mm.
or a grosser way of showing up in the world energetically, emotionally, physically, to more subtle experiences, more subtle energies, more subtle ways of being in the world. Can you speak to that in your direct experience, especially through your meditation and through your Zen practice? The movement from gross to subtle.
It's hard to put words to it, but um, it does make observing the grosser aspects of my behavior much more accessible when I'm sitting all the time as I do now,
Mm,
morning and evening. I can see very clearly, like, hey, you could have been so much nicer. That could have been so much more refined. These little tiny incidents of a day and a life are where we're working. I'm not I'm not interested in like how to do anything, any sort of endeavor, project, creation perfectly. I'm interested in treating other people with a great modicum of respect and dignity, including myself. And that requires a lot, for me anyway, that requires a lot of quiet. Otherwise, I can't attune enough to see where I failed to keep these precepts. But when I'm sitting a couple of times a day, I can see really clearly my failure to keep them. And then I know exactly what I want to work on as I'm going forward with that person or in that situation or in that context. Because whatever I'm not addressing or seeing clearly, I'm going to put it off on somebody else. And that's not the life that I want to live.
mm,
Um, that's today's answer. If you ask me again in an hour or tomorrow, I will
mhm,
probably have some other answer, but I can
mm,
tell you for sure that the sort of micro practice of just treating other people with care, that's one of the places where I see this playing out, this
mm.
subtlety.
Finally, we're in a particularly difficult time right now. I say that from the perspective of the collective and mental health.
Yeah.
I believe we're living in a time right now where we're seeing more challenge, more stress, more anxiety and depression. In at least as far as I can see, there's a lot more addiction. There's a lot more suicide. There's a lot more extreme reaction and challenge that people are experiencing in the collective. What's your advice to anyone who feels that they are, if you will, under the influence of this difficult time, this difficult moment? How do we make it through a moment such as this collectively?
We mentioned this earlier, but I think this is worth bringing back. When we think about the well being of this world, planet, your community, your friend group, we're constantly being taught by the media that we are not good enough and that everything is separate from us. Especially in the United States, everyone for themselves. It's so individualized.
Mm,
And everyone is here to get special and show up and stand out. We're seeing the entertainment business crumble right now for this, and more will be revealed. What I see in myself and in my own practice is if I can continuously allow myself to feel connected to the suffering and the pain of the world, and to not lose myself in it, but to support myself with my practices and to do my practices for the betterment of every single being, to not leave out the douchey ex-president or the crazy murdering that is happening on every side of 30 wars. I'm not separate from any of that. To not leave it out of my consciousness and to keep it very close over here where things are very close to me. It keeps me practicing, keeps me wanting to fortify myself. It keeps me wanting to connect to other people and wanting to serve locally. It gives me a purpose. So the ask I think that I would have would be to continuously remember that you're part of something bigger. You are never, ever alone here. And all of us understand how your pain has arisen because we all have our own story and the same pain, even though the path might have been a little different, but it's the same pain.
Mm.
You're never alone. And for you to remember this, for you to keep going so that you can feel like you're helping yourself, so that you can help someone else who's on the path a little bit behind you.
Mm.
That is a beautiful way forward. And I can't think of any better way to go forward from this point in my personal life than to consistently think about this interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh said, this interweaving of all of our lives.
Mm.
How often can I remind you that you are never alone, that you are part of me?
Mm. I love this idea that through practice, sitting on a cushion, that you can work out your inner pain, that can be done, and that effort has an effect on the external, that the mental causation of external events can be put to rest. And that seems to me to be the effort behind meditation of many lineages, but certainly the Zen effort is to bring peace to the mind and peace to the world.
Yes, for sure.
Hmm.
For sure. There's a reading. I think it's in, I have a bunch of books here, but I want to get something for you.
Hmm.
I think also to just not avoid the pain
Hmm.
and to not try and numb it and get rid of it. There's a lot of pain in hiding, and that turns out to be, at least as far as I can see, the hiding and numbing myself was much more painful
Hmm.
than just facing what it was that was painful in the first place. I just want to say
Never worked for me.
it never works.
Uh,
This is a really beautiful book called Opening to Oneness. It's a guide to the Zen precepts, Nancy Mujo Baker.
hmm.
And I'm going through this to write a book report on it for chaplaincy. Learning to voluntarily open up with others is a very effective way to start ending the personal version of the distinction between inside and outside. Not to mention self and other, and thus to experience an important aspect of oneness, true freedom. So voluntarily opening up with other people and allowing yourself to be heard and seen by people who could support you, I think that's a really good way forward. And that will inspire, speaking of bodhicitta, that will inspire other people to do the same.
Hmm.
And there are a series of the friends in the friend group, previous story of my son, that have now opted to drink less or not at all.
Mhm.
Come on over because the water's fine in here.
That's right.
And you can be that person. You can be that person.
Mm.
This there's even a Zen version of the 12 steps of AA that helps us be more in touch with our own inner experience, even when it's negative and painful. And that
Mm.
I think that's a good way to close us out. Don't don't maintain the distinction between you and someone else. There is no distinction. We are
Mm.
all here suffering and struggling. And the more you practice, the more I benefit. The more I practice, the more you benefit.
Mm.
And the gift keeps getting given.
It seems to be the interrelated nature of things.
Yes. Yes.
Well, Elena Brower,
Mm,
I love you so.
so much.
So grateful for your time. Thank you for presenting these concepts, your presence, your wisdom, your love, and sharing with the Recovery 2.0 global community and beyond. Is there a way that people can connect with you? I know you have a really beautiful podcast. Could we speak to that?
Sure. Podcast is a great way, actually. It's called Practice You. I've interviewed many of my teachers and people who've inspired me over the years, and it's a pretty robust place to learn.
Mm.
And the podcasts are relatively short. They're usually between 20 and 40 minutes. But my site is probably the best place, elenabrower.com. And there you'll find pretty much everything that I'm up to, the courses and the various things that I do. I think that if you're a parent and you're watching, the Perceptive Parenting course might be my best work.
Mm.
But it's a small sliver of the spectrum, but boy, I'm so proud of that. It's an audio course and I love it so much.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Elena. So let's everybody collectively, we'll take a deep inhale together and a full exhale. And we end each of these talks with a very short prayer. It's the Recovery 2.0 prayer. We have found so far it to be universal. No one has yet written us that they were offended by this approach. So let's hope that record continues here. But so to the great universe and the powers that be, put us in the places you want us to be, with the people you want us to be with, doing the things you want us to do. Thank you for the joys and the challenges of our lives. Amen. Satnam and Namaste.